Now to that promising vaccine news this morning, Moderna says its COVID-19 vaccine is 94.5% effective in an analysis of a large late-stage clinical trial. It's a hopeful sign as cases surge around the country. With me now to tell us more about what was learned in the trial is Bloomberg senior healthcare editor Drew Armstrong. Drew, a week ago we learned that Pfizer developed a shot that was found to be more than 90% effective in a trial. So how is this Moderna one different?
I think what we mostly have from Moderna right now is a little bit more granular data. It certainly seems like the efficacy levels are similar, 94.5 for Moderna, more than 90% for Pfizer. One of the things we did learn from the Moderna data that we're still waiting to find out from Pfizer is that it appeared to prevent severe cases of disease, which is pretty good news. And we also have some very interesting information on how this has to be stored. It can be stored at lower temperatures. It can be in a fridge for 30 days. It can stay at room temp for 24 hours. That's really, really good news. The Pfizer vaccine has to stay in these kind of super deep freezers most of the time. It doesn't appear to be particularly stable in comparison. So, if you just want to think about what that means, the Moderna vaccine, it probably means you can go and get it, at places like a CVS or at the office. It just opens up the distribution possibilities for something like this, which is a really big deal when you're talking about having to vaccinate millions and millions and millions of people.
Yeah, and it's my understanding, Drew, that even with the Pfizer vaccine, there aren't facilities widespread that are able to keep the vaccine actually cold enough for long enough periods of time to make it widespread. So this Moderna news certainly seems like a big step in the right direction. What about this element that you talked about, the prevention of severe cases? Take us into why that is and why that's such a big deal, because even people who got COVID in this trial after taking the vaccine, they didn't get very sick, right?
Yeah, what the data actually shows that all of the severe cases were in the placebo arm. So there obviously were COVID infections in the vaccine arm. There were a handful, I believe it was 90 infections in the group that got the placebo and 5 in the group that got the vaccine. But yes, vaccines, when they work, not only do they prevent us from getting sick, period, but sometimes it means that if you do get sick, you can have a milder case of illness. It's a really, really big deal. It turns, if you can turn COVID-19 from in some cases for some people, very dangerous and even potentially deadly disease into something that is much more mild, you don't have a global pandemic on your hands. You have a bad case of the flu or a cold or something like that. It really changes how we approach this disease meaningfully, assuming that those data bear out in the larger trials results that we'll see as these trial results continue to roll in.
Drew, how are you and your sources and public health experts around the world thinking differently about a so-called return to normalcy after learning today's news? How does that change the timeline?
Well, yeah, one of the things that I've said before and other people have said before is that a vaccine doesn't do any good to anybody when it's sitting in a freezer or a lab. This thing doesn't, it doesn't mean that Thanksgiving is back on or anything like that. We still have to get this cleared by the FDA, out into people. The data have to be as good in the final analyses and the later analyses as they look in these, what I will emphasize, are preliminary numbers. But once that starts to happen, or once this starts to roll out, then yes, life does start to get back to normal for a lot of us. It also means that, I think it's worth remembering that it is going to take a while for this to happen. I think Moderna has a couple tens of millions of doses that could be ready to go this year. Those are going to go to frontline healthcare workers who are dealing with some pretty dire situations around the country and are always very much at risk. They are the front lines against this disease, and as well as with vulnerable folks. For the rest of the population, you're probably looking at somewhere into 2021. But the good news is that it puts a light at the end of the tunnel on a lot of the sacrifices that people have been making throughout this pandemic.
Yeah, well, the vaccine that's effective and safe is only safe and effective if people end up taking it, Drew. And one thing that we've learned throughout this process is there are a significant portion of the American population that is hesitant to take any vaccine. Particularly minorities were hesitant to receive a vaccine. Early polling has showed. Is that expected to change now that we're seeing so much positive news in such a short time?
It's certainly going to help. I think you want to see the data. The public health messaging and the outreach to a lot of communities is going to be important. Remember, there's still parts of this country and people in this country who really don't believe that this is a serious disease. You hear reports about people saying, they think it's fake. There's going to be some hesitancy about getting those people to take a vaccine, which is going to be problematic. The good news is that the efficacy level seems to be high enough that it will offer a degree of individual protection, not just, kind of broad herd protection that we get from vaccinating, lots and lots and lots of people. It will have that, additional, it appears that it is reasonably effective, in fact, very effective at an individual level, which I think is going to be quite important.
Drew, I want to end with just mentioning this tweet that you sent a little earlier this morning as this news was breaking. Always scary when I bring up tweets, right? But no, this is an important one because you said there are still a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to this. You said, how long does protection last? Are there longer-term safety concerns? What does Pfizer's vaccine do against severe disease? Can Pfizer end up improving the storage temperature? When will these questions, do you think, be resolved, and how will that change the outlook?
It's going to take a while. Remember, these trials are being run in this expedited way where, the safety data that we have right now is really what is the safety after the first injection. And so when you look at what the safety looks like, it looks like a lot of people having the type of, side effects or adverse events that you get with any kind of injection site irritation or some nausea or something like headache and things like that. What we really need to see is what are the longer term safety profiles of this at 2 months out, 3 months out, 6 months out. I think we also still aren't going to know for a while, how long does the protection from this vaccine last? Is this something that lasts for 6 months and then you need to get a booster or another dose? Is it something that lasts for a year? Is it something that lasts for 10 years? We just aren't going to have the answers to that until we can actually wait that amount of time and see what happens with the people who have gotten the vaccine. And then, I think the Pfizer question, we need to see more data from them. Moderna is obviously way up. Pfizer's down a little bit this morning. The stocks, I think it's probably validating. They use the same technology. It's a new technology. Having 2 good results is very validating that technology appears to work. But we need to see more data from Pfizer as well. These are just top-line numbers. They look great, but there's a lot more that we need to see.
Drew Armstrong, Senior Healthcare Editor for Bloomberg. Thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.